In 2009, almost as soon as it hit theatres, Universal Pictures' movie The Fourth Kind met suspicious criticisms. Questions arose as to the legitimacy of the film's based on true events claim. Since then, new information seems to support the initial scepticism. The movie revolves around Dr. Abigail Tyler and her treatment of the people of Nome, Alaska, for sleep disorders. In studying the patients, Dr. Tyler begins to identify recurring patterns. The nighttime visits from an owl invoking the image of a grey alien in the mind's eye, and comes to believe these encounters are actually screen memories of alien abductions. Interest in the movie prompted the search for the real Dr. Tyler, which yielded no results. Then in November 2009, Universal Pictures agreed to pay a $20,000 settlement to the Alaska Press Club in regards to complaints about fake news archives used to promote the movie. Universal Pictures admitted to planting fake online news articles and obituaries to bolster its claim of based on true events. Of course, the media gleefully denounced the film as another Blair Witch project, but in doing so they threw out the baby with the proverbial bathwater, ignoring the history of the area, and that is a much more interesting several-layered story. Since 1960, at least 24 people, all natives, have disappeared in Nome, Alaska, population 3,500. A remote town with a subarctic climate on the shore of the Bering Sea. 10 of these disappearances have occurred since 1990. 17 men, 7 women, with 9 bodies still unaccounted for. Many died under suspicious circumstances. The cases were ignored almost entirely by the media until the release of The Fourth Kind. Contrary to claims made in The Fourth Kind, the FBI did not visit Nome over 2,000 times. In fact, the disappearances were getting little attention from the FBI. Their involvement was primarily due to council member Delbert Pungawi of the Savunga tribe, whose brother disappeared in Nome in 2004. Pungawi felt that something was preying on the native folk in Nome. Pungawi stated, "It should have been given attention years ago. The region is just overwhelmed with this. They're tired of living with these big gaping holes and no closure." Local law enforcement is viewed with distrust, to say the least. The Norton Sound Health Corporation passed a resolution seeking a federal rights investigation due to extraordinarily high numbers of missing people. For 5 consecutive days in 1988, there were encounters with strange beings, witnessed by dozens of Nome residents. Researcher Mark Chavinsky has related some of these encounters. On August 24, 1988, at approximately 3 a.m, several witnesses were driving on Belts Road outside of town when they observed a strange glow in the sky. The group turned around and drove toward the source of the glow, a short, muscular man surrounded by a greenish glow with red eyes. The group began to chase the entity, who then ran out in front of their vehicle. The entity was run over, but no sound was heard. The creature seemed to flatten itself out and vanish. The group drove into Nome, gathered more witnesses, and returned to the scene. Several of the witnesses then chased the little man on foot, but then were in turn chased by him, at which point they returned to their vehicles and left. The following day at approximately 2:30 a.m, 3 carloads of witnesses encountered a little green glowing man standing in the middle of a roadway. Again a vehicle ran over the creature with no apparent ill effects. A witness claimed the car ran right through him. On August 26th, around the same time, another group witnessed 3 little glowing men standing in the middle of the road. The group pulled over, and the entities changed colours 3 times during the encounter. Some of the witnesses compared them to holographic projections, but others were convinced they were real. At around 3:30 a.m, a number of people gathered on Belts Road observed 3 of the little men standing on the side of the road. One was silver, another black, and the third was blue-green in colour. They all had a green glow surrounding them. On August 27th, around 2 a.m, several witnesses gathered on Belts Road sighted 2 little glowing green men with red eyes that seemed to dance in the middle of the road. Witnesses who approached the pair reported a whistling or hissing sound. Reporter Janet Amasuk of the Nome Nugget said, "I have heard little green men's stories as long as I have lived here, from reindeer herders, miners, highway camp workers, village folk, folks who just moved here. In other words, not only natives, but also people unaware of the native history, which is replete with stories of the little green men." Korvinsky also cited a story told by Lois Foster, whose family originates in the nearby village of Koyuk. For as long as she could remember, Foster's great-great-grandmother told the family of the 3 little men who came to the village of Koyuk in a silvery-looking disc that sailed through the air. Korvinsky put this date between 1795 and 1805. Foster's grandmother also talked about the 3 little men who she encountered when she was a little girl, around 1913. According to the great-great-grandmother, the little men were extremely strong for their size and able to carry large logs without assistance. They lived in the area and over the years learned the native tongue. They explained to the townspeople that some mechanism had broken down in their craft, permanently disabling it. The biggest mystery of the North is probably the case of the disappearing village at Lake Angikuni. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, has labelled the case as an urban legend. The tale was originally reported by journalist Emmett E. Keller, and a story appeared in the Toronto Daily Star on November 23, 1930. It was largely forgotten until it was included in Frank Edwards' book Stranger Than Science in 1959. On a cold November night in 1930, a fur trapper named Armand Laurent was travelling with his 2 teenage sons. The trio witnessed a huge light, for it seemed to be as big as a steamship, changed shape from moment to moment. It was as round as a ball, now like an enormous bullet, now shaped like a star. The light changed course in the sky many times, before streaking at great speed, straight as an arrow, towards the north and out of sight. A couple of days later, a pair of Mounties stopped at Laurent's isolated home, and Laurent inquired what brought them out his way. They are rumoured to have replied, "Eskimos disappearing, stuff like that, nothing important." Laurent is said to have related his tale and informed the Mounties that the light seemed to be heading in the direction of the lake. Laurent was never questioned further, a disappointing but understandable oversight. French-Canadian trapper Joe Labelle, who the Mounties said was new to the area, claimed he travelled to the remote Eskimo village near Lake Angikuni. Normally greeted by the barking of sled dogs and children begging for hard candy, he was instead met with silence. The village of approximately 30 people was deserted. It was the manner in which the village was left that has been the source of the long-lived mystery. Labelle found pots of stewed caribou with a thick layer of ice. Children's toys were scattered on the floor. He found a sealskin parka with 2 bone needles still in it. He continued, the boats and the kayaks were tied at the shore, even the harpoons were still on board, and the half-stripped carcass of a walrus was just as the men left it. Even the rifles were left behind, some hanging over makeshift fireplaces and others propped next to the caribou flap doors of empty homes. Labelle informed the Mounties, and as the story goes, the Mounties came out and investigated the village. They found the missing sled dogs tied to trees under a snowdrift. The village men would have left without their guns, sleds, kayaks and harpoons. Surely not one of these items would have been left behind in the village. The native folk are nomadic. but according to the tale, the place seemed abandoned in the middle of a normal day. There were no signs of a struggle and no footprints that led away from the scene. Supposedly the RCMP employed some of the best trackers in a search that spanned all of Canada and even ventured into the northwest United States, but to no avail. The most disturbing claim in this case is the apparent exhumation of an Eskimo grave. The rocks marking the grave were undisturbed, but the grave had been dug up. If this is true, it would have been quite a feat, as the land was in a state of permafrost. One account tells of an unnamed Mountie who said it would have required a jackhammer and weeks of back-breaking work to empty the grave. A Freedom of Information Act request regarding this case was filed, but to no avail. They simply did not reply back. So what do we make of all this? Sensationalized stories with no basis in reality, churned out solely to entertain on long cold days and nights. Is there even a grain of truth and history behind this so-called urban legend or native superstition? Was there a cover-up and disinformation campaign, or more likely just a dereliction of duty in dealing with native matters? Whatever conclusion you come to ultimately only raises more questions. The bottom line is that this remote location is an ideal place for such strange phenomenon to occur and be forgotten, away from prying eyes and official authorities. At the end of the day, it's up to each of us to decide for ourselves what might be going on up there.